Thank you, Michael, for the gracious introduction, for the invitation to be here. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. I'm going to talk to you about spirituality and healthcare more broadly. I'm not going to talk about anything specific in psychiatry or medicine or anything like that. Let me start with two caveats. One is that I will probably occasionally say doctor or medicine. Take this in as broad a way as you can construe it to mean to refer to all healthcare professionals. And second, to say that a fair amount of the language I'll use will be particularly Catholic and Christian. This is not meant to exclude anyone, but just to be sort of particular to my own personal spiritual life in its particular context, and my trust is that it will resonate across people's experiences in other faith traditions or lack thereof. So with that, let me address my question for you, and that's whether health care is in itself a spiritual practice. It might seem like an odd question, that medicine is the most delicate and intricate form of applied science. I think most people would agree. And that what's not science in medicine, we might call the art of medicine, making particular judgments about particular patients. I think many people would agree. But to talk about medicine as a spiritual practice, I think most people would say not since the Middle Ages. The era of witchcraft is thankfully behind us. This is the era of molecular medicine. And if anything, chaplains might be of some limited use to some patients, helping them to cope with their illness. But it would be adjunctive. It wouldn't be central to what medicine is. So what has spirituality to do with healthcare or healthcare with spirituality? The answer may first depend on what we mean by spirituality. A lot of people, probably not in this room, in a divinity school, but in other places, equate spirituality and religion. However, even though they're conceptually related, I think we all understand they're not synonymous. In one sense, of course, spirituality is the broader term. I define spirituality simply as the characteristics and qualities of one's relationship with questions of transcendence. In that sense, in its very broad meaning, everyone can be said to have a spirituality. One person may call the transcendent God. One may also live in relationship with transcendence and refuse to personalize or call the transcendent God. And even if one explicitly rejects the existence of the transcendent, one still has a relationship with transcendence, at least by way of rejection. And so even an atheist in this broad sense has a spirituality because that person must search for personal meaning and value in light of his or her rejection of the possibility of a transcendent source of meaning and value. By contrast, a religion is a specific set of beliefs about the transcendent, usually in association with a particular language used to describe spiritual experiences, a community that shares key beliefs, as well as certain practices, rituals, and texts. In that sense, then, religion is narrower than spirituality. Not everybody has a religion. Yet, in another sense, spirituality is also more specific than religion. Because while within every religion there are going to be groups of people who share key beliefs of the religion, remain part of the community of believers, and yet have slightly different ways of praying or slightly different ways of living out their relationships with the transcendent. And ultimately, since every human personality is unique, every human relationship with transcendence will be unique. Spirituality is therefore ultimately personal, because it is only persons who can apprehend, question, and live lives that engage transcendence. Now, I'm already, 5 minutes in. You may be asking, what has any of this got to do with healthcare? All right? Abraham Heschel, the 20th century Jewish philosopher and theologian, once said in an address to the American Medical Association, attended apparently by 3,000 physicians, that to heal a person, you must first be a person. To heal a person, you must first be a person. To heal, at least in its initial etymology, means to make whole. And I think if we are committed to healing patients as whole persons, what Heschel is probing at is that is pushing us to understand not only what disease and injury do to the bodies of patients, but what disease and injury do to them as embodied persons struggling with transcendent questions. And in the midst of all that's being written and said these days about spirituality and healthcare, to the extent that bookstores actually still exist, I guess there are still a few Barnes and Nobles, right? You can go there and look at the section on spirituality, and there'll be huge sets of books about spirituality and coping with cancer, spirituality and coping with rheumatoid arthritis, spirituality and having prostate cancer, whatever it may be. But it's surprising that so little has been said about the spiritual lives of the healthcare professionals who care for the sick. As Heschel reminds us, if we're to heal patients as whole persons, we ourselves must seriously engage the transcendent questions that only persons can ask. If we're to be true healers, I think it means that we must rediscover what it means for medicine to be a spiritual practice. Now, the relationship between medicine and spirituality became problematic by the late 20th century in a way that it never was in earlier eras or isn't now for many non-Western cultures. And I'll tell you a simple story to illustrate this. It's actually a true story. It's going to sound like a joke, but it's actually true. At least it was told to me by a priest. Maybe he was lying. I don't know. But the story is of a Roman Catholic couple who are attending Easter Mass among First Canadians, at which the native North American bishop is presiding in his native language. Right? You got this? So the couple, and they're both physicians, are the only white people in the church. And the bishop's sermon is lengthy. For Catholics, that means more than 7 minutes. And as he preached, every once in a while he sort of turned to them, sort of acknowledging that he realized they didn't understand a word he was saying. And at the end of his 30-minute sermon, he turns to his guests, acknowledges their presence, and welcomes them in broken English on behalf of the congregation, and then their hearts sink because he offers to summarize his homily in English. But what he said was this Jesus, strong medicine. Efficacious scientific Western medicine is also strong, but I think the question that many people are asking today is it strong enough? Western medicine works, and very few people want to give up antibiotics or neurosurgery in favor of crystals, but isn't it possible for physicians and other healthcare professionals to practice excellent scientific medicine and still be aware of the spiritual dimension of their work and responsive to the spiritual needs of patients? I hope you'll agree with me that that is still possible. Because particularly if any of you are involved in healthcare or know anyone who's been seriously sick or have been seriously sick yourself, you recognize that illness is a spiritual event. Illness grasps patients by the body and the soul at once and shakes them both. And illness inevitably raises troubling questions of a transcendent nature, questions about meaning, questions about value, and questions about relationship. Those are spiritual questions. How we as healthcare professionals answer these questions for ourselves will affect the way we help our patients struggle with those questions. And I think that in healthcare, we know far too little about the ways in which we touch the lives of our patients, or perhaps in some ways the ways in which we fail them. Recently, for example, I found myself in a discussion with a nurse about the role of touch in relationship to healthcare and spirituality. And I think she had misunderstood something I had said during the lecture, and she came up afterwards to ask me about it. I was sort of defensive, and I said, well, I really do touch patients. Can I show you what I do? I'm a general internist, right? So I put my right hand on her right shoulder, and then from behind, and then I used my left hand as if it was my stethoscope going back and forth. And those of you who are clinicians know how common and ordinary that is. And I said, I touch patients like this all the time. And she said, "Ooh, do you know what that does to people, how it makes them feel?" And I was even more defensive, and I said, "Well, no." And she said, "Well, you could touch people like this." And she sort of leaned on me kind of perfunctorily as if she was doing it for balance. And she said, you could have done that, but here's what you did to me. Do you mind if I show you? And she touched me in this really remarkable way, in a way that felt as if she was touching me and not touching me at the same time. That communicated connection and yet some sense of objectivity at the same time. It felt almost as if there was an electric charge there, but there was no space between her hand and my shoulder. And I said, "Is that what I did to you?" And she said, "I think so. It's what I think you did to me, and probably what you do for all your patients." And at that point, I thought to myself, wow, strong medicine, strong medicine.